Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 1291. Okay. So we learned yesterday about a deeper level that when you want to transform, want to eliminate and transform gvuras, even legitimate judgments, you go to even a higher level than chesed. And that's the level of toiv, good, which he said extends even to someone that's not worthy, because it reaches into atik, and the kavanah is that you continue to be good to them in order to create mistakin ayidezeh, in order to create a healing, a repair. Because you're reaching the level of less smaila b'hayatika, level in atik, where there's no smile, which is gvura, the left, but like he said, hainu shelo yesham gam chinas yamin, because it's higher than the structure of the tracks of the defined parameters of ishtalshlus of chesed and gvura. Where there can be a battle, and there can be an opposition, like we learned that the bnei elikim, which are coming from a kedusha dika place, are presenting and challenging havaya, the chesed of havaya, due to the fact that they're protecting God's honor, because someone transgressed, and you don't have, as he said, the lack of avodah, and you don't have the amshach of the energy that mitzvahs accomplish. In order to resolve that, you have to go to a higher level, and that goes to a place that's higher than gvura and chesed. So as I summed up yesterday, so we have several levels here. Going from the bottom up, you have the gvuras kashis, which are the harsh severities from the satan and the malicious and sadistic forces, similar to the sadistic human beings that have a natural cruelty. The different levels we learned about them, and there's also levels, more subtle, less subtle, but definitely look at everything with a negative eye, or are always there ready to punish, always have glee and excitement about punishing someone that deserves punishment, or even worse, just plain being cruel, even to their loved ones. Then you have where that revolves from, and he called that's the Satan, and that comes from the head of Esav, and it originates from Atfe, from the bosom of Yitzchak, Gvura of Gedusha. How does it originate from there? Because the Gvura of Gedusha is also severe, is also judgment. So there's and judgment, and it could be a legitimate judgment, but it's coming from the profound love of Gvuras Mumutakes. When a person has very intense love for the divine, they automatically will have hatred, or you can say a kas, anger, and wrath at anything that is the opposition to God. So that's where the Gvuras Kashas come from, the Gvuras, the Gedusha. And then there's the Gvuras that we just mentioned, Mumutakes, the sweetened severities that are, yes, Gvura, but it's intense chesed. It's like chesed in a fiery and passionate Gvuradic way. And then now we learn there's even higher than that, because that can still be challenged. Like he said, that can be challenged by Bnei Elikim, by the Gvura of Gedusha, can challenge that. And when you need Yeshua, Hashia, salvation, that has to come from a higher place. Now, he gave the example of this, like we see by Isha Toiv Be'etzem, a person who's fundamentally a good person. So the Rebbe Rashab said, Bizgabrus HaChesed, with a intensification of kindness. So Yeshbei Gamke B'chinas Tigberis HaGvuris, he also has Gvuris, but there is B'Tagberis HaChayis Lam, it's with an intense passion, the love, and to stand up against anything that tries to impede that hamshacha, that chesed. But nevertheless, this type of person is not going to get angry on the opposition, on an enemy, and he won't punish him. Either he will heal him or he'll repair him, that he should no longer be an opposition, an obstacle, or I'll push him aside, but in a way, in a way that should be a repair, a healing, a remedy to his soul. So both of them are driven by a positive element here. And now I want to go a little deeper into something yesterday. We just touched upon it very briefly. I want to go into the parentheses about Rav Shimon bar Yochai, and I looked into it and I see that's a fascinating understanding here of the Rebbe Rashab and the Gemara and Shabbos. Just 1 second, please. 1 second. Yeah. And also, I want to compare it to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer in Tofresh Peites, which also very interesting. So, I'm going to read it inside. I'm going to explain it in more detail. Yesterday, we just read it quickly, and actually, I probably even misspoke in explaining this parentheses. So, just give me one moment here. I want to see how it is in the Rebbe Rashab. Okay. So the Rebbe Rashab says, "V'ayim asher kosev b'Gemara Shabbos daf lamed gimel amud beis." So we learned the Gemara yesterday. We read it. Rashbi and Rabbi Lozer, when they came out after 12 years in the cave hiding, so it says that b'kol mokum shenos neinei miyad nisref. Everything they looked at, they gazed at, immediately began to burn. So they were destroying. Yes, because of their extreme holiness. And they saw people involved with temporary pursuing a transitory and impermanent life and permanent things in place of eternal life. So whatever they had gazed at began to nisraf, burned. Yotza Baskel, a Baskel came out, a voice from heaven. Return to the cave. I did not create the world for you to destroy it. Even though it's coming from a holy place, but it's destructive. Okay, then it says, and he doesn't cite this in the parentheses. In Tofresh Peites, he cites only this, that when they came out the 13th year, everything that Rabbi Lozer struck, Rashbi would heal. Now, why Rabbi Lozer was not on that level is another discussion, but Rashbi clearly changed. His attitude now was a healing one, which of course is consistent with what he just said, that he still is a very holy person. And is still driven by Keser and Tov. But now he's gone to a higher level that instead of punishing or angering, he looks every way to repair. But here's the interesting thing. When you continue in the Gemara continues and says that the person who informed to the Romans on Rashbi encounters him afterwards. And the Gemara says that when he did, he looked at him, he gazed at him, and actually caused him to die. The language there is noch nafshe. That's the language. Noch nafshe means his soul expired. Before that, says the language there is, let me just look it up. I'm looking now, Islam Gimel Beis, 36b. On 34a, let me just look it up 1 second. Yeah.
Thomas is the Lashon Dalton.
1 second. Let me explain it. I don't need now help. Listen to what I have to say. You'll see where I'm going with this. So the Gemara says the language that Rab Shimon went out to the marketplace, Nofik L'shuka, Chazi Yehuda ben Gedim. He saw Yehuda ben Gedim, which was the person who brought the decree that threatened Rab Shimon's life in the first place. Rab Shimon said, Adayin yesh l'zeh ba'elam? Is this one still in this world? In the world? Nasan by Einov. And here it says, he gazed at him, V'nasa gal shel atzomis, and turned him into a heap of bones. However, if you look a few lines earlier, it says like this. That it says that he says that Shimon bar Yochai, right before this. Let me just read the context here. That someone who commented to Rashbi that now Rashbi is going and healing everything and correcting everything, talks about a cemetery where Rabbi Shimon created a tikkun. So he began to mock it. And there it says that Rabbi Shimon set his eyes upon him and he perished. V'noch nafshe. Now, Tosfos on page 33b says that Rabbeinu Tam is Geiris, doesn't Geiris Gal Shal Atzomis, B'loshen Gnai, which means in a negative way. Elo noch nafshe. That's what Tosfos says. So the Rebbe Rashab is apparently coming to address a seemingly contradiction. You just told us that Rashbi had to go back into the cave because he was causing destruction. And now he comes back and he's healing everything, that Rabbi Lazar, or afflictions. So what happened here? Rashbi now, we say he's turning someone into a Gal Shel Atzomis. That's what we said about Rab Sheshes. That's a negative thing. So look at what the Rebbe Rashab says. The Digduk Haloshen is before it said that after the 12th year, Miyad Nisraf, immediately burned. And that was not acceptable to God because that's destruction. Noch Nafshe, so the Rebbe Rashab, is saying, that Tosfos actually says that the emphasis on the positive, Noch Nafshe. It's true. He died, but Noch Nafshe is a very positive term. It means his soul came to rest, which really means he died, but not in a way. Gal Shel Atzomis is Gnai. He turned someone into a heap of bones. So if you look at right before the parentheses, what did the Rebbe Rashab say? And yesterday we discussed it, that this Teiv Be'etzem, either when it comes to someone that opposes God or opposes Kedusha, what does he do? He doesn't get angry and he doesn't punish him. He either turns a misakin him, he shouldn't no longer be an obstacle, an opposition, or yadichi be'efish yitikal nafshe. And the lashon is nochel nafshe. So I'm suggesting that Rebbe Rashab is actually bringing proof that what happened to Rashbi after the 13th year, even when it was an opposition that he had to deal with, he didn't deal with it in a destructive way. He actually brought peace. That means maybe yadichi, he pushed him aside. It's true. This person perished, died, but it's called nach nafshe. And that's what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. Digduk l'shalosh. When you're precise, he's not using a negative expression. He's using a nach nafshe, which is a very positive expression. Because the objective of Rashbi was not punishment, was tikkun. So yes, it says in the Torah sometimes a person has to die because of an aveda or something like that. Or like a kiva shaloka eshe nasa achicha. It says about Malchus, that when a person is whipped, it says he's whipped because he's your brother. You do it because out of love, not out of, God forbid, the negative. It's not a negative on its own. So this is a proof and explains also the Gemara, Noch Nafshe, and as I said, Tosfos is great, says clearly that he's not greatest Lignai, he is great as the language Noch Nafshe. Even though in our Gemara it does say Gal Shel Atzomis. So this would be a higher level than Gal Shel Atzomis, which would be a punishment. So we have Gevura that punishes, even if it's legitimate, but it's still a punishment. Or we have Yadicho, he pushes him aside in order to bring a tikkun nafshe, and that perhaps is the language v'noch nafshe. That's how I would explain this parenthesis, which now makes it all which makes it all consistent. The interesting thing is in Tavresh Beites, in the Maimer, in Tavresh Beites, the Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't bring any. He just brings the Gemara that whatever Rabbi Lazar afflicted or caused problem, Mochi struck Rabbi Shimon Mossi brought healed, which of course supports this whole idea, but he doesn't go into these details. The Rebbe Rashab adds this detail and based on the Tosfos.
That's interesting, because the Frierdiker Rebbe, maybe this is the reason. In Pshat, Yehuda ben Gerim, most, I think, of the Mephoshim are saying that he went b'mezi to Roimi speak against Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But Tosfos,
look in the Tosfos. The
Tosfos is saying no, that he was a Chacham and he did not go to Roimi.
He says in Tosfos, he says they were called Anshe Tzudahem. Rashbi called them Anshe Tzudi. He sent Rabbi Loza actually to him to get a blessing. In Moed Katan, the famous story where he went for a blessing, he went to him. So that's why he says, if you look in the Tosfos, he addresses this.
According to Tosfos, Yehuda ben Gerim was a Chacham. He was a Chacham from the Chachamim. From
He says, one second. He says clearly, the Ein Nira l'Rabbeinu Tam, this Girsa that Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim went, v'nishmu l'malchus, he went and informed to the Romans, so Rabbeinu Tam clearly says no, and so on. But it does say noch.
According to Tosfos, he did not go to the Romans, but he spoke among his people, and then the Romans hear. But he did not have a bad intention. And according to this, it's not natural.
So why did Rashbi put him to death?
Because he should be careful. But the lashon, according to this, is noch nafshe, not nafshe.
That's what I just explained. Anyway, relevant to our discussion here is the main point is that it's noch nafshe, and that's the digduk haloshen, which is a very different language than just burning things. Burning means you're destroying. Here, the goal is ultimately tikkun nafshe, a repair. Anyway, I wanted to add this piece. I want to make sure everybody understood it, and that's why. Okay. And that's basically the point that we learned yesterday. This is reaching the level of Toiv all the way into Atik. The higher Toiv is higher than Chesed, as he explained. And there's no Istaifus. There, from Atik, there's no room for any type of weaning of energy. Not weaning, gleaning. And any energy should go to any Gvura at all, like we learned inside. And that's why it says Havai Yechata Meriva, that Meriva of the enemy, and he's talking about all levels. Kvura de Gedusha are eliminated, like he said, Vayichanu lebilti yiseru, that they no longer can ever prosecute or come with a complaint. The Gam, from the word Kares, you cut them off completely. Keser is the letters Kares, it cuts off the negative side, but now you're doing it all the way from its root. You're not doing it with Chesed and Gvura battling it out. As we're going to soon learn, we're not talking about Avaya Ish Melchama. We're going to learn it's a higher level of Avaya that's not engaged in war because it's above the whole union of war, the whole battle between Chesed and Gvura. Chesed and Gvura, you can have an argument. The defense says so. The prosecutor comes and complains, the Bnei Elikim, Yisyatzav al Avaya, and they challenge the kindness and the compassion, and then you have to deal with that. But here we've reached a place of a tagbeiras hamshacha by valkena dezeh yechatu meribot, and that eliminates or definitely vanquishes any opponent. So that's what I just wanted to add. The parentheses is actually answers the question, even though he doesn't say it clear that way, but it clearly answers the question. The digduk haloshen, if Rashbi was only healing, how did he end up killing someone? Because they did something wrong. So the answer is noch nafshe. Which hints to tikkun the nafshe. That's how I would understand the parentheses. Okay. That's where we reach the end of the paragraph on page 1291. Anyone want to ask anything? Okay. So we'll continue learning now. Let's continue.
That means that even in the Darge for Rashbi, which is above Chesed and Gvura, there is a mocking for at least noch nafshi to say if something happened.
But he explained. He said clearly, "Yetaknu shelo yilameneya, or yadichu be'efin sheyutikul nafshi." Let's not add anything. The Rebbe Rashab himself says it clearly that this level person is doing it. Either he's sacking, like we see Rashbi repaired things that were being struck, or yadichui be'efin. So both of them are coming from that positive place. Tikun lenafshe. That's the expression. Tikun lenafshe. So even he pushes it. Yesterday I gave the example. Pushing aside would be, let's say, in the classroom or in a teacher and a student. But here, clearly in the parentheses, even yadichu that he so noch nafshe is still a tikun lenafshe. It's a repair for him. The bottom line is its concept is repair, not destruction. That's the key thing that has to be remembered here.
Yeah, interesting. The
Okay.
Rebbe does not bring it. Interesting.
We continue now, the new paragraph on page 1291, where the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And this will be more understood more or better understood, will be increasingly understood. What we say in Alanisim, that we say on Chanukah and Purim, so it says, you, God, with your abundant compassion, you stood up for them and you protected them in the time of their anguish, in the time of their tzara, the time of their crisis. And the lashon is amadato dafka. What's the diuk of amadato? What it means, you stood up. I know it's an expression we say also in English. He stood up for another person. But what's the diuk? What's the purpose of saying amadato? He's going to say now. And we also see another place where it's used. V'chein ksiv, hin Hashem emed l'riv amim. That again, Hashem emed. God stands up. He rises. He rises up against them. L'riv amim, to battle with the nations. The mashma from this pasuk is mashma. It appears the kol riv hu ba'amida dafka, that every battle is standing upright. In other words, dafka ba'amida when you're standing. Now we see battles are fought. You don't fight a battle lying down or sitting. But nevertheless, what's the deeper meaning of amida is going to explain now. So he's going to explain, obviously, the amida is the aliyah and the hagbah to the level of atik, to vanquish the enemy. That's why the word amida. But let's learn it inside. Like we see by a person, a person who rises to go to battle. When he was in a sitting pose, and niskav misiyaseh means he stood up upright instead of being bent down. When you're sitting, you're not standing your full height. Your body is down and your legs are up. Niskav misiyaseh v'yamed al raglov, stood up from his sitting posture, from a sitting posture. V'yamed al raglov, he stood up on his feet. Loriv imanagde, to go to battle, to fight imanagde with his enemy, with his opponent. So we see that that's how that battle is fought that way. That you could be sitting comfortably at home or wherever you are, and then you rise to battle. So what is this amida is going to explain now? The inyan in this is the yadua hefresh ben amida li yeshiva. It's known the difference between a standing posture, an upright posture, and a sitting posture. And he refers us back. You may remember this in volume 2. Ayin Beis. So in volume 2, even though in the footnote they say Ulay Tzarechli is Rish's bara, because apparently it's not in Lech Lecha HaBeis. So they're saying in volume 2, page 701. So there's a whole mimer there. He talked about the difference between standing and sitting. So he's referring us back there. So what's the difference? The Yeshiva, when a person is in a sitting posture, he's sitting, Reishe Nishpa Lamata, his head is lowered. Like when you're standing up, you're standing upright. When you sit down, your head goes lower as your legs go up. Lamata Mekemose, the head goes lower from his height, from his full height. V'raglav bugboyim in haaretz, and the legs are bent upwards from the ground. So when you're standing, it's upright, the full height. When you're sitting, the higher part of you goes down and the lower part of you goes up. Now this is true in every kid is sitting, but especially when you talk about a king, you say Shemaim Kisi va'aretz Hodeim Ragli. So he says that Yeshiva al kisei raglov hen al gabi shrafref. So even though the truth is that even when you don't have a footstool, your legs go up. But clearly, when you have a footstool, which is shrafref, is a footstool, especially you see a person has a footstool, so then the legs go up even higher than regular because they're not even on the ground anymore. So that's like the ultimate sitting of a true proper sitting is a person's head goes down and his legs go up. They're lifted from the ground. So what he's saying here is that without the footstool, it's also higher because the legs, but it's not still on the ground. Your legs are still on the ground. They're just bent instead of standing upright. Whereas when you're sitting with a footstool, they're even higher than the ground. And in the standing posture, when a person is standing, it's the opposite. That his head is lifted, is standing, is up, goes all the way up, with the uplifting of his head. Like he said, he stands up from the sitting posture, he's standing. V'raglov, and his feet are standing on the ground, and they're lower, much lower than they are when they're in the sitting pose or sitting posture. So the head is higher and the legs are lower because you have the full upright position of standing. That's the physical difference between sitting and standing. Now, what is all this in Ruchnius? This is physical. What does all this mean in a spiritual level? So he says like this, the example of this above is referring to this. What Razal, our sages say, Gimel Shoyes Shniis Yeshiv V'dan. It talks about what is the Eibus to do through the 24 hours of the day, or the 12 hours that he refers to there. So he says the Gimel Shoyes L'Shenes, I forgot what he says, Mizavik Zavugim, I think. But the second 3 hours of a 12-hour period, Gimel Shoyes Shniis Yeshiv V'dan. He sits in judgment. He's like sitting on the throne of judgment. Yeshiv V'dan, like a judge, sits in his chair, and that's the Eibus in that state. Obviously, we're not talking about physically, we're talking metaphorically. But the word is Yeshiv V'dan. Shlishish, the next 3 hours, this third 3-hour period, what does he do? Yeshiv V'zon. He sits, V'zon, and he's mefarnis, he is sustains. He's basically being mamshich and drawing the sustenance of the zon is mozin, all types of sustenance for the world. Al derech mosel, like for example, melech shebi yoshve al kisei ladun anshe medinose. Like a melech when he's sitting on his throne to judge the people, his subjects, the people of his empire or of his nation or his country. What is that state? The meichin of the melech are now in a lower state than when you're standing upright, because he's going down to listen to different arguments or to pass judgment and pass rulings about his subject, about his people. So his meichin the b'chinas hashpola. Shari amidus chesed v'gvura nimshachim min haseichel shebereish. Because the midas of love and reverence are nimshach, are from the seichel sheberosh. The head represents the mind. Where do the midas draw their energy from? Where do they come from? As we know, we're talking about the contemplation that brings to emotions. So the emotions come from, first a person contemplates, reflects, and then from that comes the result of either chesed or gvura or a mix of the two. And when the person who's the state of being the judge, needs to judge any matter between one person and another, let's say two people have a disagreement, or he needs to pass rules that deal with interaction of human beings, interpersonal relationships. Yerid Eira Seichel, his Eira Seichel, the energy of his mind, descends b'midesav shebelev, into the emotions of his heart, im l'schus or to merit, or to the opposite of merit, or to guilt. So let's say someone's brought, two people come before the king to judge, the question being, they have a disagreement. So what does the king have to do? He has to come down to that level of midas. He can't just be sitting and philosophizing on a purely abstract level. He has to deal with a real practical situation, to merit or the opposite of merit, l'schus or l'chay, which is chesed and gvura. V'harizeh shiflus v'yeridas le'etzem ha'seichel shebemoyach k'shalemed la'atzmei. And this is a state of a descent, of lowering himself, a state of being lowered and descending from the etzem ha'seichel, from the core mind, in his mind when he's learning on his own. When the melech is in his own chamber and he's studying and learning, there it's a moichin. Then he's not going to state where the moichin is in its full posture. But when he's coming and sitting and he's in judgment, he has to take the moichin into midas. And that's called a hashiflus v'yerida. Now he's going to bring it back to the Maimer Chazal. Kach. So this was al derech mashal, an example of a king. So now he's going to say, Kach, Gimel Rishenis, Gimel Shas HaRishenis. He now does bring the first three. I was wrong, not Mizavik Zivugim. That was a different Maimer Chazal. I confused matters. What are the first 3 hours? What does God do? He sits and he's immersed in Torah on his own, so to speak. Now, of course, you'll see right away, he says Yeshiv. So why is it Yeshiv? It should be Aymed. Let's see what he's going to say. But Shniyes, the second 3 hours, the second trimester, so to speak, the second 3 hours, Yeshiv Adon, he sits and judges. Which means he's not learning Torah on his own, which is just the Meichin La'atzman, but he's going down, he's descending and drawing into the emotions, into the supernal attributes, the supernal emotional attributes, the Atzilus, Ladina Elamis, to judge the worlds. Vayeshev Hashem, Melech La'elam. The Hashem sits, Melech La'elam, the king forever. He's in a state of sitting in judgment. Ukamashal Hayeshev al Kisei, like the example that we discussed of someone sitting on a throne, on a chair, on a throne. Shereshe, next page 1292. Shereshe Mushpal. His head is lowered. Kachu Inyan, so too is this idea, Hashpolos HaMeichin b'midas. That, so to speak, the Meichin of Atzilus is lowering itself into the midas. This is the outer dimension of intellect, because it's the intellect as it relates to a conclusion, to our result. When you're learning something in its purest form, you're not yet discussing what direction it's going, what the conclusion will be, what ruling you will have. Like we learned, even midas shebeseichel is not yet a conclusion. It's just in the seichel, but especially seichel shebeseichel, intellect is purely understanding an idea without any inclinations, not chesed, not gvura. But when you get into midas, you're dealing with chitzenis hameich, shaboim b'chinas yirida ba'amidas. The lower level of intellect, as it's applying itself to a ruling, whether to merit or to guilt, that is the meichin coming down and descending into the midas. That's why it says Yeshiv Adon. Ach raglov. Now, what about the second half? That when he's sitting, his legs are lifted. What does that indicate? Ach raglov, however, his legs mugboyin are lifted up. What's the inyan of this? Inyan who? The inyan of this is ki yadua that aglayim hu hiluch er hashefel lenivroim debiyah. The aglayim in Ruchnius refers to the drawing, the channeling, or the carrying, hiluch. It means the carrying of the Eir HaShefa, the light, the energy of the flow from Atzilus to Biyah. So remember, this is important to just emphasize, because we are physical beings. All these are physical examples to help us understand spiritual concepts. So the human being is created in the image of God. So just as we have a head and a heart and legs, reish guf regel, as we learned earlier, the head, the body, and the legs, so too in Ruchnius there's the 3 levels. Like we say, for example, in the Mishkan, The Mishkan, the sanctuary, and the Beis HaMikdash were built also on this model. The Kodesh Kadoshim is the mind, the Holy of Holies. That's where the Aron is, the Ark. The Ark with the Torah, with the Luchis and the Torah. In the Kodesh refers to the Guf. So you have right, left, center. You have a Shulchan, and you have a Menorah and a Mizbeach in the center. The Mizbeach is like the heart. And then you have the third section, which is the Azara, the outside, the Oyel Moed, where there you have the Mizbeach HaChitzen, that you brought offerings, actual behemoths, animals. The Mizbeach HaPnimi Azav, the golden Mizbeach internally, was only for Keteris, was for incense. It's a very peaceful, calm type of offering. But when you bring a behemoth, you're dealing with the physicality of the world. So it's compared to the raglayim, the legs, is the outer dimension of the Mishkan as it relates to the outside world. So this is the same thing in Atzilus. Chabad of Atzilus is like the Kodesh Kadoshim, the holy, the Moichin, the higher state. Midas is Chitzenius HaMoichin, going down into the Midas. And the raglayim is Nehi and Malchus, Ragleh Yerdes Lamata, the legs, which really draw the energy now into the lower level of Biyah. So when the Melech is sitting in judgment, so the first step is that his Moichin is going down to the Midas, and the Raglayim are lifted up, and he says, what is the Raglayim? That's carrying the energy into Biyah. The earth, Ha'aretz is Biyah, and it serves as Hadem Ragli, as the Shrafrif, as the footstool. It's a place where the legs, so to speak, of Atzilus, the lower external, the extremities and the externals of Atzilus rest on the Aretz. That's the level of Netzach Chaydish Say, the lower levels of the Midas, not Chesed Gvur Teferes, but the Nehi Dezah, Shein Klei Hashpah. They're the containers of the Hashpah from the higher levels. When you speak proportionate to the Midas Alyenis, Chesed Gvur Teferes, and he is the Klei Hashpah, Kaneda, Ub'Shah Yeshiv L'Din, and the time when the king or the god is sitting in judgment, where it's the descent of the outer dimension of the intellect of Chabad into the emotions of Chesed Gvur Teferes, then also on the other end of things, the legs are not going into Biyah, they're also being lifted up and higher than the Aretz of Biyah. V'hainu, what does that mean? That Amshacha, when the king is sitting in judgment, has gone from Chabad to Chagas, but it's not gone to Biyah yet. It's not been implemented in this world yet. It's still, the king is still sitting, you're still standing before the king. So it's the elevation. So he says, only in the next 3 hours, Yeshiva Zon, when he actually implements the ruling and he's Zon, which means he sustains. That is already Hamshachim Biyah that goes down into Biyah. That's Hamshachim B'fnei Atzmei. The Eisha Er Shenimcha B'bchinas Chagas, that same energy that was drawn into Chagas during the second 3 hours when he sat in judgment, Eina Nimcha B'chinas Hashpah Lamata. That does not go down below, because that's already still the king is ruling. So it's still his Chabad is going into his Chagas. And then he is also part of that process. Shekeinhu Eifun Hamshacha. Let me just continue and we'll sum it up. Shekeinhu Eifun Hamshacha b'seider v'adraga d'ishtalshlus. And this is the manner of how the transmission goes in an orderly, progressive way in the cosmic order of ishtalshlus. That the air above, a higher energy, does not go unfiltered or undiluted into a lower level. The only thing that goes is levad. Only the outer, the chitzenius of the Elyon, goes into the tachten, to the lower level, like we learned this earlier as well. So that's the order of the process. it doesn't go that the full energy goes to the next level. No, the full energy, only the outer dimension of it, that's like a teacher and a student. The teacher doesn't give all his brilliance to the student. He gives the outer dimension of his brilliance to the student. So it comes down, the chitzenius goes levad. Okay, so what has he established here? Two things in the process. That yeshiva, what does yeshiva mean in the spiritual context? It's when the Eibishter or Lakus is not in its pure form as he is for himself, learning himself, but in a state of descent, where the Moichin is not just a pure Moichin, it's the Moichin addressing the needs of the people to determine who is right and who is wrong. Schus and chayv, like he said, merit or the opposite of merit. For that, the Chabad goes down. That's why sitting. That's why he's in a state of sitting, because the Meichin goes lower and so-called goes down into the level of Chagas. It's closer to the heart, to the emotions. What about the other step? The other step is Nihi, which ultimately its purpose is to draw the energy down, the Raglaim, are to draw the energy down all the way to Biyah. But when he's sitting in judgment, we're not just dealing with Biyah right now. We're not implementing anything. The king is addressing an issue. So the people are now standing before the king. The Chabad of the king goes into Chagas, and his Nehi is not in a state of Hamshachah to Biyah. It's an elevated state as it's responding to and listening to so-called the ruling that will be given to Chagas. Then afterwards, there'll be the next 3 hours where there'll be the Zon, where he will actually go and sustain Biyah. But that's another stage, another Hamshachah, b'fnei atzma, like he says. So it's true, when he's sitting in judgment, it's lower than Chabad on its own, but it's higher than the king actually passing a ruling or actually governing the people, because he's still sitting, you're still sitting in the king's chamber, and you're still sitting in his judgment. So it's lower than his etzem haseichel, but it's higher than his ashpah and the rules that govern his nation, because they're sitting in the, as I said, in the din, they're in the middle of a judgment here. They're in the middle of a case, a court case. So that's why it means that the Nehi rises up, because it's not involved in implementing into Biyah, but it's involved in the process that we just learned about, the process of what's going on here. This is a state of sitting. How about standing? However, when you stand, Niska faresh, the reish goes upright, straightens out. It's not going down, it straightens out, standing upright. Niska faresh. So it's not mushpal. Niskav is the opposite of mushpal. Mushpal means it goes down. Niskav means it's going upright. That's the mind in the head, in the reish, in the head, in the brain, that goes up to its core place, without going down and descending to judge anything of others. It's not dealing with others. It's all the meichin la'atzmai, not as it applies itself to right and wrong, or to merit and guilt, yeah. V'hainu, what is that? Gilei b'chinas meichin ha'atzmim. That's the revelation of the core meichin in its purest form. Shalamayla b'chinas hamidus. That's higher than the midas. So the head is now all the way upright. It's not going down to getting closer to the midas. It's standing upright. And what about raglov? And also the other way around. The raglov eimdim ala aretz. The raglov also now go down and stand upright, and they're standing on the ground. They're not lifted up from the aretz, like in the state when he's yeshiv v'don, in judgment. Hainu she'eseh ha'er atzmei nimshach lemata b'biyah. That very energy does not have to go through gradations. That very energy goes all the way down to biyah. And as we learned earlier, commission is bar leil. As we learned earlier, if you may recall, he said that when you go to the atzmi, it's not subject to the regular progressive gradations. that you could be mamshech something all the way down below lamata mata. It's not subject to the distinctions of higher and lower. And it comes down all the way below. And let me refer you where that was explained. He said that a few times. One place here on page 1272. Yeah, 1272. And then he elaborated on a lot more later. I want to see where it is. But he kept on talking that when you go all the way to the Atzmi, it comes all the way down below. Well, that's one place. There's more. I have to find the other ones. Oh, on the bottom of 1278 and 1279, I believe. And I think a few other places. I'll look it up later. I think also page 1280. It was a big theme that he brought up earlier in explaining how Atzmi, like when you read Simcha, you were able to go beyond the levels and structure. So here's the paradox. When the Mechin go down to the Midas, then the Nehi goes up to the Midas as well, like we said, and doesn't go down. But when you're reaching Atzmi, you're able to draw it all the way into Biyah, all the way down below, like he said here now. And now he goes back to answer the question, or to explain what he began this paragraph. Why he used the word Oimid, Amadato Lahem, or Hini Hashem Oimid L'riv Amin. So he says like this, V'zeu Hini Hashem Oimid L'riv Amin. And here now, behold, God rises, L'riv Amin, to battle with the nations, D'hine Ba'amida, L'riv, Yesh Yisra Mai L'gam Elimud HaChochma La'atzmei B'seichel, Ha'atzmi Shalei. So we just learned that standing is a person learning, like the Melech or the Eibishter is learning Torah for himself, which is higher than the sitting, the posture of sitting. But now he says, when you rise to battle, there's a quality that's even greater. Even when you're learning Chachma for yourself, with his core intelligence, which is also a state of standing. Which also is higher than sitting in judgment. Because also when he sits and learns, because even when he's sitting and learning for himself, he also rises up to fight. He doesn't stay in that posture. He rises up lariv imenagde. That indicates that he needs even more upright state to go to battle, even more than when he's learning. Well, then, of course, the question begs, so why does he say sitting by learning for himself when that's also upright state? I asked that question before. So if he doesn't answer it, I'll tell you what I think, but it seems to me we're going to get an answer to that. I mean, you could say simply that even though technically he's sitting, but really he's so-called psychologically in an upright state when he's learning for himself. It's not, in other words, even though physically he's sitting. But doesn't seem like an adequate answer. But when he goes to battle, there's no option. There he must rise, even when he's sitting and learning on his own. Tells you that it goes even higher, even more of an aliyah and hagbah, because he has to rise to go to battle. Like we said, even begashmis, physically you see that. That indicates on a greater elevation, on a higher, going even higher than the seichel atzmei, which is also higher than the seichel that goes to the midas, to the emotions. And what is that lamaila? Lamaila hainu b'chinas pnimius ve'atzrus hameichin dechachma bina shem b'chinas pnimius hakeser. So now we're going to a place that's even deeper than just meichin to yourself. Moichin on your own is higher than the moichin as it relates to emotions or to judge or to applications and inclinations of chesed and gvura. But in moichin we also learned, and this is going to connect it all the way back to mutva, murgish, and muskel, that there's atzmis hamoichin, as it's connected to primis hakeser. Primis v'atzam moichin the chachma bina shemabchinis primis hakeser. Remember that primis yichud abba v'ima ilan, as they gaze at what? At Arich, at the forehead of Arich, which draws down the energies from Atik. So now we have a level where to go to battle, you need to go even higher than just your core intelligence, which is higher than the intelligence that relates to emotions. You go to Primis HaKeser. V'nimshach lamata b'biyah ad lamata mata. And it doesn't just remain there. Because you're reaching such a higher level, then from there it goes down all the way below, lamata mata. L'natseach la'amenagid, to be victorious and vanquish the opponent, the enemy, la'chniyah, to humble him or to subdue him or to to weaken him or to essentially to lower him. Well, to lower him completely, to overcome him and to lower him completely. So it doesn't just remain. So when you're going up to the highest level, like we learned, that has the power to come all the way down below and to vanquish and win the battle. Like we learn in Basiligani, as you go, the deepest treasures are there what? To fight the battle down below. And Vizeu Gamkein, and now it goes back to the Ala Nisim, what we say in Ala Nisim on Chanukah and Purim. That you, in your great compassions, you rose up for them, or you stood up for them. Amida dafka. Here again, the language dafka amida, rose, stood up. The hainu gili b'chinas primis hameichin. It's referring to the revelation of the inner dimension of meichin, not etzem haseichel, but primis hameichin. Shezeh b'chinas hagbas hareish. Primis hameichin, that indicates a state of standing, which indicates a state of hagbas hareish, that the head is in its highest possible posture. And on the other hand, his legs are also standing and going all the way down to the ground, because you're drawing this energy all the way down below. And that's what the Eibishter did. Ala Nisim, that's what he did. He stood up for the people. He went up to the highest levels and drew it down all the way to help them win the battle. And this is the idea that the enemies, the meriva of the enemies, the opponents, are crushed or eliminated. Or we said, or the different expressions of how you translate yechatu. Like he said, two things: that they can no longer challenge, and also they're cut off. So he says like this: because it was explained earlier. The sibus sadinim. What was the cause that the dinim could even raise their head in judgment? Was due to mipnei stalkus hameichin, because the meichin was removed. When the meichin become weaker, it allows for more din and judgment. This was stated very clearly at the bottom of page 1287. The stalkim hameichin, that's the din of Rosh Hashanah. It's a state of sleep, like he said, stalkus hameichin, and it's shefer that brings back the primis hameichin. So he says, so it's a cause of stalkus hameichin, which means the meichin are not upright, they're not in their full estate. That's why there can be din, there can be a battle, there can be an opponent that challenges havaya. And when they draw down new meichin, a new dimension of the intellect, of the divine energy in the intellect, primim va'atzmi, internal and core meichin. And this comes to an internal union of chachma bina, like we learned earlier. Not as meichin, not emre vetzas alabonim, like the mother that hovers over and nurtures her offspring, the midis, the emotions, but yichud pnimi da'ava. The chachma bina are being catapulted back. Bina is being catapulted back to a state where it's connecting to its highest levels of meichin chadoshim pnimim va'atzmim, and we said it was a new energy, chadash, The Hamshachi mebchinas pnimis ve'atzmus ein sof. The Hamshachi there, the transmission is coming from the inner and core of ein sof. Commission is bar li'il ba'erech, as we learned at length earlier, as was explained at length earlier. Ozay mizbatlim kol hadinim. Then all the judgments, v'akitregim, and all the prosecutions, and all the complaints are eliminated, nullified. V'ach teiv v'chesed yerdifuni. And the only thing that you pursue is teiv and chesed. Teiv and chesed, goodness and kindness. Ad lamata mata be'elam is biyah. To the point that it's drawn all the way down to the worlds of biyah, bri yitzir asiyah, in this upright position. And that's why it says amadata, amida. Because it's reflecting this full upright position where the head is all the way as high as it can be, and it extends all the way down below to the lowest levels. That's the level of this pnimius ve'atzmis hamoichin. So he's connecting this to what we learned earlier in the whole process of the elevation of how we grow, mutfa murgish muskel. We come to the place where we're totally all consumed with the highest, deepest levels of the divine. And that all relates to this level of Havaya Chatam Riva, and that has the power to transform, not just to draw down energy, but to transform the very kalim, and even the negative. And here in this case, even the judgments are completely eliminated. Okay. So we'll stop here. Any questions?
What does it mean that there is higher than Hamshacha Lamato? He said, במידו לריב יש יסון מיילו גם מלימוד החוכמה לעצמי בשכל העצמי שלו של המיילו מישיבה למשפט. What is that? What is לימוד החוכמה לעצמי?
We just learned it at length.
But the whole entire time, I know you don't want me to interrupt. I cannot understand it. I'm trying to understand which spot is it?
What do you say? When the Melech is learning Torah on his own, he's not sitting in judgment. So his Meichin is not involved in judgment of Chesed or Gvura, Schus or merit. So it's like a person learning Torah. Then when they're sitting and they have to deal with people with Adin Torah, then the Meichin is now involved in more so-called judgment or dealing with the right and wrong. So it's a seichel that's going down into the midas.
I understand that.
What's not understood about that?
But I don't understand this level that is limit of chokhmah.
What's not understood by what I just said? Explain your question.
No, what you said is understanding. I don't understand something that the Rabbi Rashbi is saying here.
What don't you understand?
Limit of chokhmah which level?
That's exactly what I just said. He said it.
Yeah, but I don't understand which level is it. This is lower than Amido Loriv, and this is higher than Yeshiva Lemishpat.
First of all, do you understand that it's higher than Yeshiva B'Mishpat? Let's start with that.
This I understand.
Okay, and then the fact that in order to go to battle, you have to stand, you can't even be in that position of learning on your own, tells you that you have to go even to a higher place to fight a battle, even higher than when you're learning on your own. When the king has to go to battle,
also,
he has to go out of his own inner sanctum. So he has to go even to a higher level than Meichin to himself, because he has to now go to battle. So he has to.
This is very clear to me. I don't understand.
So what don't you understand? I'm not clear. Can you just explain what you don't understand?
We have a level from Amidal Oliv, we have a level from Yeshiva Lemishpat, and we have a level which is Lamailo Yeshiva Lemishpat, but it's lower than Amidal Oliv. I understand.
What's that? I just explained. I really don't understand what your question is.
My question is, where is this belonging? This.
What do you mean where? Where in which level is it?
Yeah, which level?
Okay. So he said with Fadish. One second. It sounds to me, with all respect, that you weren't even in this class. It says clearly, it's the level.
That's why I'm asking you. I want you to make me to know it.
No. 1 second. We learned it inside. He said it's the level of Pnimius HaKeser. You remember that?
Amidal Oliv is Pnimius HaKeser.
Correct. And learning La'atzmei is Moichin La'atzmei. And are you listening or not listening?
Please explain it to me. That's why I'm asking you. Amidal Oliv is Keser.
I need help here. Maybe somebody else can explain it. I don't know what to say.
Reb Simon, why can't you tell me which level is this? The Seichel Atzmi Shaloi Shalomaylo Meishiva LaMishpach. Which level? It's not a middle.
Moichin la'atzmam, not moichin that goes down to midas. That's the level. Is that clear? Moichin on their own, not as it goes down to midas. That's the level of learning on your own. That's the level. The moichin as it goes up to Keser is to go to battle. The moichin on their own, as they don't go down to midas, is learning on your own. And when you sit in judgment, you're now dealing with Chesed and Gvura, moichin that goes into midas. Three levels.
That means it's a moichin. Before it's going even in Chagas.
This is not only explicit. I just suggest you read it again. It says it inside Befedish.
I read it probably 10 times. Okay, fine.
Okay,
I understand now. It's a moichin before it enters in Chagas. Because moichin in the second.
Okay, that's exactly. It says it Befedish. It's not even my explanation. He says it Befedish. He explained it at length at the bottom of page 1291 on top of 1292.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, so the last line, Rabbi, where it says, "It's azamid batalim kol adinim v'ketzurgim v'ach tov v'cheser." You're funny. That was from when he stands up to go battle. Then that brings down the atzmius, and that's when he's able to just. When he reaches up to Keser, that's when he's able to bring down that level we talked about yesterday. Atika, ain't small, but Yamin is able to.
It's exactly the same idea. Yeah, it's exactly what he said before. That you have to elevate. If you look on top of page 1291, he says, you go all the way up to Keser, to Atik. That's where you reach a level that doesn't need judgment. There's no judgment. There's no punishment. It's all about a level that's only going to do tikkun and repair.
And then you bring that down. You bring that down, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Havaya Chatem Rivav. It eliminates the opponents, the enemies. Yeah.
I had a question about that we from yesterday. When we say the lace small batika, and then we learned yesterday that not only there's not small, but there's no yamina. Why is the Hasidic, what I've learned all the time, it always quotes a lace small batika. Why doesn't it say more properly from what we learned yesterday, lace yamin va small batika? There's neither of those levels are there. Why does it just quote small? I couldn't figure that out last night. I was trying to learn that. Why does it only always quote small if there's really not even Yamin there? It's so high. It's about higher than it's Hishtalshalis, so to speak, Keser.
Well, it's like the point, like saying before the Tzimtzum, that you have only Oirein Sof, and there's no Helam at all. There's no concealment. There's no din. There's no Gvura. There's no Smoil. So the focus, the Chiddush is that there's no force of concealment, or in this case, no Smoil, no Gvura. But the truth is, when you really think about it, the truth is also Yamin, even though it's Kula Yamin, meaning it's only Chesed and only Oir, but it's not in the form of Yamin. That's the point. The Chiddush is that there's no Smoil. Once you know that it's, even though it's now Kule Oir, and like you said, Kulei Toiv, it's all good, but it's not in the structural element of Chesed. But nevertheless, the end result is it's Kulei Chesed. It is Kulei Yamin. However, it's not the Kav of Yamin. That's the way it's to be understood.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good. No other questions? Okay, we finished the paragraph on page 1292. I do see, however, that the Rebbe Rashab did not really address the issue. So why is the first level, since it's Seichel Atzmei, why is it called Yoshav? Yeshiv. The Eibishter sits and learns Torah. Gimel Shosh Hashem is Yeshiv ve'esek b'Torah la'atzmei. It would seem to be, should say there, Oimid. So the only way I can understand it is by saying, like I said before, that in Yeshiva itself, there's a level like the standing within sitting, so to speak. And the real Amidah is only when you go to battle. But he doesn't say it explicitly. I'm just pointing out this point that was not really explained. But maybe that's the pshat. Maybe not. Maybe I have to discuss, look elsewhere. But you also do see how he's bringing together everything we learned earlier. The whole flow here.
I was just going to ask you about what we learned earlier. In terms of a more, Chassidus applied practical application, if we want to appeal to the Eibishter's sense of to have like we said, Hashem Yichatim Marivav, to draw down a lakus that's going to combat the Gvurus Kashos and oppose the Makatragim. So we do that by the things we learned earlier about being Batul and looking up to Arich and trying to V'chomi Odecha, Simcha Shel Mitzvah, all these tools that we talked about in order to reach those higher levels. Is that essentially equivalent with appealing to? We didn't talk about Atuk, we talked about Arich Anpin, but is that the equivalent of how we in our own personal lives can try to overcome the Gvurus Kashos that may come to prosecute against us for our Averos and whatnot?
Well, first of all, the Rebbe Rashab is going to discuss this later. He's going to go into more detail. And secondly, when you go back to page 1281 and 1286 and 1287, he more or less says that in order to transform this dainus, the transgressions into merits, you need to reach Avarabba, a deeper love that goes all the way up, like similar to the Avarabba of Makol Meidecha. That's correct. That's what he said already back on page 1287. But he's going to come back to this in what this means in our Veda. He's going to discuss. This is going to be pages upon pages that he's going to still discuss this. So we're going to have plenty of time to apply it many different ways. But that's the general gist of it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So we stop here at the end of the paragraph from page 12.